Hello,
All right,
everybody.
Hey there, Ernestine. All right, good evening, everyone. It's officially 6:01. So I will go ahead and call the January 25th, 2022 meeting of the City of San Diego's Commission on Police Practices to order. Again, welcome. This is our monthly open meeting. I usually start by reading off the purpose of the commission, just so everyone knows. The purpose of the Commission on Police Practices is to provide independent investigation of officer-involved shootings and in-custody deaths, and an unbiased evaluation of all complaints against San Diego Police Department's personnel in a process that will be transparent and accountable to the community. The Commission will also evaluate and review SDPD policies, practices, training, and protocols, and represent the community in making recommendations for changes. The mission of the Commission is to hold law enforcement accountable to the community and to increase the community trust in law enforcement, resulting in increased safety for both the community and law enforcement. And with that, I'll kick it over to Charmaine for a roll call.
Thank you. Chair Hilpert,
I'm here.
Commissioner Case,
Here.
Commissioner Fitch,
Here.
Commissioner Holtrop,
Here.
Commissioner Anderson,
Here.
Commissioner Workman is excused, Commissioner Dent,
Here.
Commissioner Harrington is also excused, Commissioner Smith,
Here.
Commissioner Clark. Let me just promote her. I'll come back to her. Commissioner Shea,
Present.
Commissioner Vaughn,
Present.
Commissioner Andrea Delba Griffin,
I'm here.
Commissioner Spruce,
Here.
Commissioner Clark. Is she in yet?
Yep, she just joined.
I will know her as present. Commissioner Clark, are you there?
Yes.
Great, thank you. That completes roll call.
All right, thank you. And with that, approval of the minutes from November 23rd. Does anyone have any edits or corrections? And if not, can I get a motion to approve?
So move.
Thanks. We have a motion from Nancy. Can we get a second?
Second.
All right, so we have a motion by Nancy, a second by Patrick. Charmaine, can you do a vote for approval of the minutes?
Physical appearance.
Second,
Second was
Robert.
Patrick. That's Patrick.
Commissioner Case,
Yes.
Commissioner Vaughn,
Yes.
Commissioner Fitch,
Yes.
Commissioner Holtrop,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson,
Abstain, I was not here.
Commissioner Workman is excused, Commissioner Dent,
Yes.
Commissioner Spruce,
Yes.
Commissioner Harrington is also excused, Commissioner Shea,
Yes.
Commissioner Delba Griffin,
Yes.
Commissioner Smith,
Yes.
Commissioner Clark,
Yes.
the chair abstains, motion passes.
All right, thank you. And did we have any non-agenda public comment received yet?
No non-agenda public comment received.
And then if there's any attendees who want to do public comments, if you raise your hand, I can allow you to speak if you have a public comment. Okay, not seeing any, we're going to move on to our educational topic for this month. So what we've done this month is we've asked Captain Jordan with the police department to give us an overview of all the legislative changes that have happened in the last year or so, and then how that's going to impact the various policies and procedures they have and what steps they're taking to make changes to that. So with that, I'd like to introduce Captain Jeff Jordan, and he has a PowerPoint that he's going to share on a screen. And then after that, I think he has about 5 minutes for questions or so.
Thank you very much. I'll take a moment just to introduce myself. As Brandon had mentioned, my name is Captain Jeff Jordan. My title within the police department is I'm the captain in charge of special projects and legislative affairs. And I'll be honest with you, legislative affairs has been taking up the bulk of my duties of late. We typically track well in excess of 100 bills every year at the state level. I think some years closer to 150 that have some nexus to law enforcement and public safety. This particular year, a very busy year at the state legislature. And what I'm going to do tonight is just walk through in broad strokes the 8 bills that have been enacted that will have the most significant impact on the San Diego Police Department. Typically, we find that long before bills are enacted, we are largely in compliance. But these bills in particular, which have gotten much media attention and also I think had garnered some of the conversations, particularly last Friday at the CPP's implementation ordinance, some of the bills being discussed tonight, hopefully will provide some clarification. If I don't describe it in significant details or substantial details and you have additional questions, to the extent that I can, I'll be happy to answer any questions. With that being said, let's kind of go ahead and start. So the first bill we're going to go discuss is SB 16 in regards to police records. It expands the release of documentation in 5 additional major areas. Most people remember that 1421 required the release of documents that were previously exempted, particularly in regards to officer-involved shootings, use of force resulting in great bodily injury, sustained complaints of dishonesty, and sustained complaints of sexual misconduct or sexual assault. This broadens that and builds upon that. So in addition to that, we are now looking at mandatory reporting or public disclosure of sustained complaints of unreasonable or excessive force, sustained findings of failure to intervene in a force situation, sustained findings of unlawful searches and seizures, and sustained findings of discrimination. There are specific timelines within this bill. I think they learned, the legislators did, that there is a backlog of some of these complaints. They're going to have to be reviewed. So anything within our possession prior to January 1st of 22, there's 365 days grace period to basically analyze, look for, process, redact, and release those documents by the 1st of the 23rd, January 1st of 23. However, incidents that occur after 1/1 of 22 are supposed to be within 45 days, and that 45 days is exhaustive of the appeal rights that an officer may have up into civil service. It increases record retention requirements. So as you know, our record requirements are typically sustained complaints were 5 years, moves that up now to 15 years, and non-sustained complaints must now be must be held for 5 years. Some agencies don't necessarily have the same requirements for use of force. It's not standardized across the state. So this requires use of force reporting by individual officers. In addition to that, records that can be used potentially in litigation moves from 5 to 15 years, which kind of follows along the fact that we're going to be retaining documents for a significant longer period of time. Any questions on SB 16 that I can answer? And we can save them to the end as well, but I'll move on to the next one.
I have a very quick question, Captain
Sure.
Jordan. Thank you. When you say, I heard you say that for the record retention, any cases or any allegations that are not sustained, there's a 5-year retention requirement.
Yes, sir.
When you say not sustained, does that include every category, including unfounded, et cetera, or is it just not sustained?
That's a great question, and one that's being debated. Much times, like I met with the Department of Justice recently in regards to some of these different things. As of right now, it's being interpreted that it would be all inclusive. So only sustained records, would be that 15 years, but all other categories, not sustained, exonerated, unfounded, not sustained would probably fall into the 5 years. But I'll get clarification from police legal to talk about that. Not sustained obviously is a singular category. So we're looking at that language just to make sure. So there is some debate about that. But I'll be happy to follow up on that as to what police legal feels regarding that. And I'm going to be absolutely blunt. People who know me tend to know that I'm pretty blunt in my assessments and my conversations. Much of these bills are vague. subject to debate, subject to clarification, and nowhere else is that seen more in regards to, say, SB2, which is the next one coming up. But Patrick, I believe you asked that question. I will get you a definitive answer if it includes all categories or just not sustained as far as reaching the 5-year.
Thank you very much.
Okay. SB2, if we're ready to move on, it focuses on police decertification, creates a process for the Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training, as we all know, as post, to revoke law enforcement certifications, making those officers ineligible to work in California. It expands the list of circumstances that would disqualify a person from employment, requires officers to investigate all complaints of serious misconduct regardless of employment status. Read that to mean you don't get to resign and then the investigation is terminated, meaning that the agencies will investigate all the way to the end, regardless if the person is still employed with the organization. Serious misconduct, the definition is still being developed by Post. Just so you know, what Post is doing right now is they're having ongoing meetings with stakeholders, including myself, about how serious misconduct could be defined. There's about 9 different categories that they're looking at right now. And clearly they're taking feedback from law enforcement as well as organizations like the ACLU and others about how serious misconduct should be defined and determined on what would be reported. And just so you know, in this particular regards, LE law enforcement must report to Post all complaints, claims, allegations, and findings of serious misconduct. So once serious misconduct is defined, I believe it's going to give law enforcement agencies 10 days to report those allegations, those complaints to the state. The reporting process is still being developed because, interestingly enough, as you know, we begin to transfer information, even with CPP, how it's reported, how it's shared, who's it shared with, the privacy rights, all those things are being worked out by the state right now. And in regards to Post, they typically have 140 employees. I believe SB2 has now caused the state legislature to double their staff to 280 by the end of the year to ramp up for compliance with SB2. This is going to be a lot of work at the state level. And then the last one, it does remove some immunity provisions for officers and their agencies in civil rights lawsuits under the Tom Bain Civil Rights Act. I would have to defer to the legal department or police legal or city attorney's office to really explain what that means in terms of the various immunities under civil litigation. Any other questions? Barring any, I will move on to the next. AB26 is a use of force bill. As with many bills, we were largely in compliance before AB26 was enacted. Speaks to a lot of the bill in regards to de-escalation, proportional uses of force, but some of the highlights that really jump out that required change within the department requires officers to immediately report potential excessive force, but at the state level, policies and procedures, but now mandated by the state. Prohibits retaliation against officers that report violations of law or regulation of another officer to a supervisor, requires updates to the use of force procedures that includes clear and specific guidelines regarding situations in which an officer may or may not draw a firearm and point it at a person. Also, there are procedures to prohibit an officer from training other officers for a period of at least 3 years from the date of an abuse of force complaint against the officer is substantiated. This is a weird language, abuse of force, use of force. They're looking to clarify that in some regards. And then the effective date from when that happens, before the bill, after the bill, all these things are still being discussed and interpreted by the city attorney's office. I will tell you that SDPD was required to update our use of force policy 1.04 as a result, 9.33 in regards to intervention. Our discipline manual is going to have to be updated. And we did send out a training bulletin to all officers, 21-12, to explain the impacts of AB26. Any questions?
I'll just ask a really quick question. That second to last bullet about prohibiting training of officers who have an abuse of force. Is that fair to assume that would only be field training?
That's the big problem, Graham. How far does this go? Does this go into the academy staff? Does it go into, training officers that might be in specialized units to provide any training? Does it go potentially right into the FTO program? These are all things that we're trying to see clarity on, and oftentimes we have to rely on the city attorney's office. Also, typically when these bills take place, they're effective as of the date they are passed. unless there's language that say it's retroactive, meaning 1/1/22 would be effective date of this bill. So then we get into issues as to, is there potentially anything that was prior to that that kind of straddles that date? So these are all things that we're exploring with the city attorney's office, and to the extent of it. And even the language, abuse of force or use of force, is somewhat or requires clarity. You may have a use of force that we often refer to as excessive that is just out of policy, i.e., wasn't excessive, wasn't unreasonable, but was out of a category. You know what I'm saying? As far as maybe use in an assaultive behavior or actively resisting. A lot of that is subject to interpretation, and this is what happens when there's vagueness. We often refer back to the city attorney's office to provide us clarity, and to the extent we can, work directly with the Department of Justice to get their input. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess what I would do, and not obviously speaking on behalf of the full commission, but I would recommend that the department take a liberal look at that and I would say I would rather have more officers who have sustained findings of being outside of policy with use of force. I would rather have more of those individuals not training new officers, rather than going, well, we're going to argue what the actual quote abuse is. I think the community would probably support that assessment, but I mean, I think once you guys know what the final is, I think we would like to hear how the department has kind of finalized what is considered an abuse of force.
Okay. Duly noted. And I would say from the police department standpoint, when we look at any one of these legislative issues in regards to any one of these bills, we typically assess them on a case-by-case basis, because each the fact pattern, much like you do at CPP with a lot of the cases that you're reviewing, investigating, and providing feedback on, the fact patterns are significantly different from every single case, and you're looking at it on a case-by-case basis. But I'm sure we can kind of report back to you on how it's being applied within the department once we get through this. Any other questions in regards to this? AB 48, this was a pretty big one. AB 48 restricts the use of kinetic energy projectiles and chemical agents, particularly in regards to protected First Amendment activities. It adds section 13652 to the Penal Code. This Penal Code section prohibits the use of kinetic energy projectiles or chemical agents by law enforcement to disperse any assembly, protest, or demonstration, except in compliance with specified standards set by AB 48, and prohibits their use solely due to a violation of imposed curfew, verbal threat, non-compliance. Requires that kinetic energy projectiles and chemical agents shall only be used to disperse an assembly, protest, or demonstration by a properly trained officer when objectively reasonable to defend against the threat of life or serious bodily injury to an individual, including a peace officer, or to bring an objectively dangerous and unlawful situation safely under control. It does modify reporting on kinetic energy weapons and chemical agents to crowd controls. Typically what you're going to see now is that kind of reporting taking place within 30 days, has to be public reporting. It will require modifications to our webpage. We'll have to do reporting out. Also modifies URSIS reporting. If the board is familiar with URSIS, obviously we do annual reporting that in some cases mirrors SB 1421, but in other cases it's broader. It also requires reporting on assaults on officers where they sustain great bodily injury and or death. Typically that's done on an annual basis. This bill will require that to be done on a monthly basis. In addition, this was another bill that required us to produce a training bulletin 21-11 to explain the legislation and the requirements. Typically, and the DPs are listed at the bottom about what was modified. 1.06 is obviously OC spray, 1.36 relates to SWAT, 1.38 is kinetic energy weapons, and 4.17, as the board is familiar with, is the First Amendment activities policy regarding the department that was produced, I believe, last year. Lots of changes are going to have to go into this. Typically, this is really focusing on how these weapons or how the chemicals are used potentially to disperse crowds engaging in First Amendment protected activities. Still does not stop officers for individual use of, say, OC spray if they're being individually attacked, but it speaks to the broader nature, really to provide enhanced protections to those engaging in these kinds of activities. it was an interesting one. There's a lot of debate back and forth. This bill was modified numerous times. I think taking into effect or consideration that some protests, particularly there was arguments that maybe officers, particularly in organizations outside of San Diego, were not fully trained on some of the equipment they were using, and that was also included in this bill.
I see that Patrick has a hand up. So Patrick, go ahead.
Just very, very briefly, thank you for this update. This was an issue of huge concern to the community. And we, in fact, had a roundtable or two specifically about First Amendment policy. And so I would be grateful if you could follow up with us regularly. I'd also love to see training bulletin 2111. I know those training bulletins are often hard for us to find in that database system that's publicly available. Would it be possible for you to, well, first question, is possible for you or someone from IA to share that actual document with us so that we can get it out to the community?
Patrick, I'll make a commitment that I think I referenced 3 training bulletins throughout these slides. I will make them readily available to Captain Dupree to forward it on to the board for your consideration.
Thank you so much. We'd love this slideshow too. It's so thorough and helpful if you're able to share it.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I believe I forwarded it on to Ms. Mosley this afternoon, so she can share it with the rest of the.
Thank you so much.
I was gonna say, before you hop on, I can just add, Charmaine and I both got a copy of this PowerPoint, and I can put it up on our Google Secure Drive.
Okay. Any questions? Any hands? Moving right along. AB958, I think it's well documented up in Los Angeles that they've had some significant problems with the various gangs reported on in the LA Times and elsewhere. This bill was actually it was actually sponsored, I believe, by the LA Sheriff's Department. It gets into defining what a law enforcement gang is, as far as a group of peace officers within a law enforcement agency who identify themselves by a name or association with an identifying symbol, such as matching tattoos, who engage in a pattern of on-duty behavior that intentionally violates the law or fundamental principles of policing. This one was updated to our policy 9.11. That had not been updated in quite some time. I believe it was last updated maybe in 2014. So it took a fresh look at that in regards to this, and we updated that with the language that came directly out of AB 958. So this policy has already been updated. And again, I can try to work with research analysis and planning who has these updates. So maybe along with the training bulletins, we can provide the updated language of the various policies that are mentioned throughout this PowerPoint. It would be a little voluminous, but I know as far as being interested, we'll try to get that information over to you. Any other questions? Okay. SB 98, another one that was really highlighted throughout the media, not just in San Diego, but the state of California. Senate Bill 98 added section 409.7 to the California Penal Code. It establishes new laws relating to the interactions between law enforcement and duly authorized representatives of news services at events where individuals are engaged in activities that are protected pursuant to the First Amendment to the United States Constitution and California Constitution. The intent of 409.7 was to provide access and protections for journalists and news media consistent with 409.5, which allowed duly authorized representative of any news service, newspaper, radio, or television station, network, into access for closed areas for public health and safety reasons. Another one addressed by a training bulletin, and this will also require a modification to 4.17. And just so you know, for background purposes of this, before we did any work on this, we met with the Society of Professional Journalists within San Diego, had a nice meeting with them as well as their legal staff to take their input, their considerations about how we craft this, particularly in regards to our training bulletin. We wanted to make sure that we were meeting the needs of the journalists that were really, I guess, instrumental in driving a lot of these conversations. I think we've done a very good job. After they saw it, we gave it to them for further consideration. And other than maybe a word here or there, they were, I think, largely in agreement with where we went with this. Any questions? I think Ms. Vaughn has her hand up.
Yeah, I was gonna say Nancy has a question.
Yes, thank you. How do we define duly authorized these days?
Well,
I mean, there's
That-
so many of them running around carrying cameras on their shoulder and claiming.
So it's interesting. I would say that that was probably the central part of our discussion. And a lot of people don't realize that in San Diego PD has credentialed over 700 journalists already who have media access badges or media. So we have a lot of people. And in today's society, it's very, I guess, Brandon, much to your point earlier, liberally kind of construed in broadest scope as far as who it applies to. So this is really, it's not looked at any one thing as far as, oh, you have to work for CBS or NBC, because we have the bloggers, we have social media, we have people working as freelancers, college students, interns are all going to fall under this. Even if they don't have media credentials, there's going to be a discussion as to, letters of authorization or letters of employment that they can show. And this really is designed to let journalists behind police lines, where lines are set up at these protests, to let them access behind lines, so they can report safely on the ongoings regarding this different, protest or First Amendment activities. And it's, I guess my answer would be totality of the circumstances, broadly construed, that they are employed by the categories listed: news services, newspapers, radio or television stations, networks. I mean, but it gets into so many other different areas as far as even the online publications and students. And I think when we look at the 700 credentialed persons that we have, that's going to provide immediate information to the officers on the line that they are credentialed media. But we've asked them to go beyond that and look at, if somebody forgot their credentials and they're carrying a $50,000 camera and they have a camera person, then they should also be considered, as far as access behind lines. In addition to that, we've made sure that we're considering best practice having our media representatives who work with these folks every single day on scene to the best of our ability, because they're going to know these people by name and have working with them, and they have outstanding relationships with them. In addition to that, a supervisor will make the final determination based on the totality of the circumstances as to who qualifies and who does not. Does that clarify your question?
Yes, sir. That's fine. Thank you very much.
It's very, and these.
It's not simple. It's not simple.
No, and that's just it. When we look at the bills that are passed, and I'll just, kind of get off my soapbox, for a minute. They get passed. I think the governor enacted a lot of these on October 10th. And by the time we digest them, it's November. And then we have maybe 4 to 5 weeks to really get in front of these, create policies, and then educate, 2,500 sworn and civilian members of the organization as to what it means, and put in place what's required to meet the legislative intent of these bills. And we're trying to do so. And that's why we incorporated conversations with the Society of Professional Journalists early on in the crafting of this bill, or crafting of our policies in response to this bill.
Very good. Thank you very much.
We also have AB 490, which is positional asphyxia. It kind of builds along the lines of the prohibition of carotid restraint. It talks about the prohibition of law enforcement agents from authorizing techniques or transports methods that involve a substantial risk of positional asphyxia. We had this sent over to our in-service training unit, and they determined that our policies and procedures are already aligned with this legislation, including the use of the RAP, which is used to how we 10 times use to control and transport persons. So we've looked at this from our in-service training cadre, and they felt that we were already in compliance with this, and nothing additional changes or no additional changes were needed at this time. This is a relatively small bill, and one that I think that we were out in front of long before this legislation ever passed. This, I saved probably the doozy for last, AB 481, military equipment. This is the first bill of its kind. And I'm going to walk you through some of and I've never seen anything like this before, so I'm going to take a moment to try to explain it. So it requires agencies to obtain approval of military equipment use policy by ordinance at City Council prior to taking certain actions related to the funding, acquisition, or use of military equipment. So just to be clear there, this is the only bill that the state, as far as I know, has directed police departments and agencies to go in front of their governing bodies to have them weigh in at state direction a policy regarding military equipment. And after it goes to City Council, the bill requires similar approval for continued use of military equipment acquired prior to January 1. So it kind of looks into the future, but also looks into the past about what we currently have. The bill looks at the governing body to approve funding, acquisition, use of military equipment within its jurisdiction only if it determines that the military equipment meets specific standards. The bill would require the governing body to annually review the ordinance and to either disapprove, or a renewal of the authorization for a type of military equipment or amend the military equipment use policy if it determines that the military equipment does not comply with the above described standards. This one, I will just tell you, I've reviewed the draft of this. We have a draft and it's probably close to 90 pages at this point. It is a large policy, potentially the largest policy that we've put together. And it only can be done in conjunction with our city attorney's office, who will have to draft an ordinance. I looked at the various PSNLN meetings that are upcoming. We're not going to have this done by next week. January 31st is the deadline for the February 9th PSNLN hearing. So we plan on moving this forward at the March meeting to begin the ordinance process, to begin this use policy review by City Council and PSNLN. It is really an interesting bill in that it so broadly defines so much equipment as military use, including even command vehicles and certain things that you wouldn't necessarily normally think are military equipment. But it's very broad. It requires obviously disclosure of all weapons that could be a nexus to military type equipment as defined by the bill, and then requires an accompanying ordinance with all of the other kinds of documentation that would go in front of PSNLN, like staff reports and all those things. So this is, in my opinion, I think of the bills that we've seen for TAR, this has been something that has taken an incredible amount of work and many months, because we saw this coming and anticipated that it would likely be passed even before it passed on October 10th. So we are a little farther along than most agencies in terms of moving this. And I think we'll be one of the first agencies in the state of California to bring this forward in front of its governing body. Any questions? Patrick's already got his hands up.
Surprise, surprise. First of all, I want to say just thank you for the clarity of this presentation and the amount of information. It's great. So I have two questions about this one. I'll just ask both of them and then mute myself. The first one is about the level of specificity in the ordinance that you're preparing. So is the CAO or whoever at SDPD is writing this ordinance, are they writing a sort of broad ordinance that gives past and future flexibility for equipment not yet known? Or are they listing very specific equipment, which may be required by AB 481? I'm not sure. The second question is,
it's been a long day. I started at 3 o'clock this morning.
Oh, go ahead.
The first question first, because my brain's on a little bit of overload.
Of course.
Yes, to both points, the ordinance may be relatively broad, but AB 41 requires complete specification of anything defined. So when I say this thing is 90 pages, it's listing every single piece of equipment. And I think the bill actually requires that we use the description provided by the manufacturer to define it. And it gets down to all weapons, wherever they may be, as far as the military like definition, including, I think, even as far as the number of rounds currently possessed within the department, how they're used, how they're trained on, the training standards of people, I believe, who are training on these different things, and projected expenses or past expenses, along with anticipated funding needs going forward. That's the kind of level of specificity that's required in this bill. And I think, this was written largely the draft by SWAT commanding officers, executive officers, with Erwin Manansala, if he's ever presented in front of, I think he did an absolutely amazing job and will set the standard for the state. So the ordinance may be relatively broad, but it has to meet all of the components of 481. The actual policy will be incredibly detailed, Patrick, regarding each piece of equipment, and then provide a number of different details regarding each piece of equipment.
Okay, thank you for that clarity. I suspect that the community is going to be very interested in this city council or the PSLN meeting. Do you have a name of the policy as drafted by SDPD, and or can you? I'd love it if we could share the draft. I suspect the answer to that is no.
I will tell
but-
you that I will just tell you, Patrick, right now, I think we're on version 9 or 10. I don't think it's something that we're going to share until it's finalized for city council, because to be honest with you, it hasn't even been reviewed yet by the chief's office or the chief's executive committee yet. And I'm sure they're going to have questions that may require further revisions to make sure that we're in full compliance. But I can assure you that if anything changes beyond that timeline for March, we'll immediately let CPP know about where we are with this and where it gets ready for council.
Great. And so for now, we should be looking for it 3 days before the March PSLN meeting. And that's a best guess.
That would be my guess, yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
And then I think you had part 2 question I didn't get to.
That was part 2.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, you're
I'm
done.
glad I got both. I think, Doug, you're up next, sir.
Yes. How does the bill define military equipment?
Very broadly. It actually gets into, if you were to read the bill and pull it up online, it breaks down a number of components, I believe from anywhere from drones to rifles to vehicles of varying levels. It really does. And then it gets obviously into other issues. And I don't want to get into the nitty gritty of this, but I think this is the last one we can spend a little time on it. The 1033, use of, the acquisition at the federal level, it gets into all of that. So it really does. If you were to pull this up, it'll lay out the 9 major categories. And then from there, we break them down to each piece of equipment under those categories, like subcategories. Does that make sense? So if it was on drones, we would break down every single drone, their use, their application, their cost, the potential use, ongoing potential funding, descriptions, and everything. Does that kind of answer that?
Yeah. So is it broad in that, for example, all drones would be considered military equipment, or
Right,
some drones would be and some may not?
Yeah, no, under the bill, I believe it refers to drones, the UAV language. But then the bill, I believe, requires, to break down each drone in possession and potential use. So it's broad, but then specifies requiring a description of each one.
Okay. So you can go to the bill itself to see all of the different things that they
You
consider.
can. It's actually, the bill itself is a little bit long, but there's 9 major categories of it, I believe, or maybe a little bit more. But then there's subcategories within the major categories. So it really drills down on you. Any other questions, sir?
Can we go back to a previous one? Was this your last one?
I believe my next question is a question slide, so I'd be more than happy to go backwards. I'll tell you what, I don't know if I can go backwards on here. Which one did you have a question on?
Actually, it was the first one. I think it was AB 16.
I'll tell you what, let's take a look at this. SB 16, sir.
Okay. And can you enlarge that or show it? It's.
I'll tell you
Not
what,
sure.
let me go out of this for a minute and kind of restart it, because that's the way I know how to do it.
Okay. And while you're doing that, my question is actually more of an observation. There's a list of things that are subject to release, but the list refers to sustained findings.
Yes.
Whereas 1421 dealt with all officer involved shootings and dealt with all
Right, but
yes, and so forth. And so there may be a false expectation from the community that they're going to get a chance to read the complaint and all of the backup, the investigation. And that's not true. If I understand it, that's true only if there is a finding by either the commission or the department that it was sustained.
so to the question, Doug, it talks about 4 topics in SB 1421. The first being any officer involved shooting. The second being just any force in general related to great bodily injury. But then when it gets 2 categories different, the sustained categories, and there are sustained categories in 1421. those are for dishonesty and sexual assault. So it even distinguishes in SB 1421 between sustained complaints and just actions that would, obviously be of major concern to the community, particularly focused on officer-involved shooting and force resulting in great bodily injury. So, there's a lot of focus on 16 in regards to just expanding the sustained complaints from 1421. And obviously the other ones are the the OISs and the force or GBI. And I will tell you, there's, at least in my opinion, I think it was done that way because when you look at what SB2 and how they're building on that, the stuff that will mostly comprise serious misconduct are going to be largely comprised of the overall 9 categories of 16 and 1421.
And then if I understood you correctly, investigations involving a sustained finding can't be released until their appeal rights have been exhausted. Is that correct?
That is the end of our process. And that is what legal has basically told us that is going to be when we release. It has to go through, and that's the way the law is written. It has to go and give a process and appeal rights all the way through civil service, because civil service can disagree with a sustained finding and basically invalidate the sustained finding. I can only think maybe of one incident where that was applicable, but that is the end of the process.
And what is the time frame, say the maximum time frame between the time that the officer is informed of the finding and when the civil service has to act on it?
I don't know if there is a time frame. There's under POBAR, there's a 1 year, time frame, but I would defer to Captain Dupree to talk about under POBAR. I believe it's a 1 year time frame to complete the investigation, but I don't know if there's an associated time frame that gets into appeal rights. That process, as you know, can take some time between the various different hearings, chief's appeal, civil service appeal, and preparing. So in some cases, we've had probably people who've been terminated from the organization who are still pending appeal, but they've been terminated. Again, our end of our process is the civil service hearing. That's the way we're following to the letter of the law. And we do that obviously for a couple of different reasons. That's the way the law was written, but it also opens up the city to liability if they were to release documents prematurely before the process has completed itself. Most likely would expose the city, should that complaint eventually been validated and we were to publicly disclose it, most likely would result in litigation against the city, brought by an individual action for premature release of documents. So there's a balancing act there, sir.
Thank you.
All right, I think that's it. I don't see any more hands raised. So Captain Jordan, thank you so much for that. I did already put that PowerPoint up on our share drive. So we review all of our documents, and then Patrick said he was going to make a PDF of that, so that way it's not editable and we can share that with the community members as well. So thanks again for your time on that one. I know that ran a little bit longer than we thought. We're thinking 20 minutes, but I think this is a really important topic, so I appreciate your time on that one.
Yes, I appreciate it as well. And I just end with one other note, just saying I know that CPP is also very interested in getting documents, particularly under the implementation of the ordinance. Obviously, this is an issue where it's coming up in that we try to get things out as quickly, whether it's CPP or the public. And obviously understand that there's just a lot of demands on the department now to release documents as quickly as possible, which is causing some different issues to make sure there's adequate resources to make sure that we meet all of the expectations, not just of the community, but of CPP. So thank you.
And then Doug, I see your hands up. I don't know if that was your previous question.
I think Doug's on mute.
You're on mute though.
Sorry, I don't have another question.
Okay. Going back to the agenda, I'm going to go slightly out of order because we only have 15 minutes until 7 o'clock. And I know we have a couple of commissioners that have to step out at 7. So I'm going to bump down to the committee chair reports and do Patrick with outreach. And then I'm going to go back up to our unfinished business, and then we'll just kind of move forward. So Patrick, let's go to you for outreach committee.
Sure. First thing I want to say is Captain Jordan still on? I mean, that was just such a wonderful presentation. and really thoughtful, complete answers to our questions to the degree that you can answer them right now, and a promise for follow-up. I really want to mark that as something that that is important to us, and I'm really grateful for that presentation. I learned a lot from you, so thank you.
I truly appreciate the positive feedback, sir. It's much appreciated because I did put a little bit of time into this one, so thank you.
I can tell. Yeah, I'm very tired, as you can all see, probably looking at your screen. It's been an intense couple of weeks, and I did some thinking about how to talk about this. Because as you know, the PSLN committee on Friday forwarded a edited revised version of the implementation ordinance for Measure B. Over the last week and a half, 2 weeks, in partnership with San Diegans for Justice, Women Occupy, Mid-City CAN, and especially the Youth Council of Mid-City CAN, we quickly moved on an 8-day timeline to schedule 2 roundtables and then multiple special meetings of this commission and our transition committee, so that we could gather feedback in advance of that PSLN committee. That process, although extremely intense, worked very well. We had so many, not only so many individuals, but representatives of so many local community groups show up, work together quickly but thoroughly to develop a list of recommendations from the community that were then endorsed by the transition committee and this commission. And many, maybe most of them, I'm still tracking them slowly, have now been folded into the ordinance. I want to be very, I just want to be very forthright in saying that that is the community's work. And what is so remarkable about the last year and a half of the Measure B process, you know, we use that word, the community, as if we're talking about one homogenous thing where everybody's the same and we know how the community feels and they all have one opinion. But that isn't true. In the weeks after the passage of Measure B, when Poppy and Andrea St. Julian and I started organizing those first few roundtables, the first 1 or 2 of them, we had reps from about 100 community groups show up, and people argued, people yelled at us, people were angry. By the second round, and we listened, right? I listened, Poppy listened, Andrea listened, members of this commission showed up to just listen, not to talk back, not to tell the community they were wrong, but just to listen. And because of that show of faith, by the second roundtable, people started working together across those group divisions. There's not one community in San Diego. There are lots and lots of communities, and most people belong to more than one. And by the end of that 4 roundtable series, we as a city, along with those of us on this commission, had come up with a list of recommendations that the transition committee then spent the next 8-9 months researching to put forward recommendations to PSLN and to the city attorney that were absolutely representative of the many communities of San Diego. Because we listened and worked closely with community partners, they had our back. And they showed up for us time and again because they saw their position on Measure B, their needs for this city represented in the work that we were doing in our roles representing them. And so even though the last couple of weeks have been really intense and frustrating for a lot of us and for a lot of folks in various communities in San Diego, Friday felt like a victory. It felt like a victory, not just of the specific recommendations that we put forward. It felt like a victory of people actually working together across difference, across neighborhood, across any spectrum you can devise, to really put everything we can into making this ordinance as representative of Measure B as it can be. There's still a lot of work to do. There are still issues and topics of concern that I'm going to keep working on. I know the transition committee under Doug's leadership is going to keep working on, which at this point is me and Diana and Brandon. So if anyone else wants to join, please do. All of that's true. We still have concerns, for example, about the felony exclusion and other aspects of the ordinance. But right now, for this one moment, I didn't intend to go into sermon mode, by the way, but I'm really feeling this week. For this one moment, I want the larger San Diego community to take this as a victory, and I want us to do that too. And in particular, I want to shout the name of Youth Council of Mid-City Can. Their roundtables are extraordinary. They are so organized, they are action-oriented, and they facilitate a conversation the likes of which we rarely see. Youth Council of Mid-City Can pounded the pavement in advance of the November 2020 election. And in my book, when the story of Measure B gets told, it will be a story about Youth Council. It will also be a story about members of all the communities who showed up to speak with more or less one voice at this PSNLN committee. But I think as a commission, we owe such a debt, and the entire city of San Diego owes such a debt to the Youth Council in particular of Mid-City Can. Again, I didn't intend to go into a sermon, but frankly, I feel like I've earned it. This has been a really intense year and a half. I think we've all earned it. I don't at all mean to suggest that I'm special in this, but we do still have work to do. But as of Friday, our work has paid off. And more importantly, the work of San Diego's many communities has paid off. That's it.
All right, thanks, Patrick. Going to go bump back up to unfinished business. Kind of as every month we do, I will be sending out a doodle poll, or actually maybe I'll be working with Alina on that, just to basically find out what our availabilities are for each Tuesday of the month. We actually had to cancel our closed session meeting today because we didn't have any cases ready for review. I know there's a couple coming up for next week, and we do have quite a backlog of cases. So we're going to check with the team, see where we are, and then try to look for availabilities for meetings. So we'll be scheduling those out. For case review, there's not really a lot to go on that. I mean, it's kind of the standard thing. We'll be working with IA just to kind of confirm the discipline that teams need to review, so we can be bringing those to the commission, so the commission can vote on the discipline, make sure that we agree that it was appropriate and it follows the discipline matrix and the team agrees. And then I know we've had IA office hours on there. I don't really think many people have been going in, especially now with the current COVID stuff. And I see Charmaine has her hand up, so I'm going to go to that real quick.
I didn't think you saw my hand. As far as the status of the review of disciplines, I've been adding those disciplines that are ready to the bottom of the spreadsheet. So just so everybody knows that when you receive the spreadsheet, you look at the bottom.
Okay. And usually what happens is IA, once they have one that's ready for the team to review, they'll send an email and they'll put it in our team folder on our Google Drive as well. So just to make sure that as we get those, and usually what I'll do is I'll try to look to see every couple of weeks if there's any that are sitting there, and I'll check in with the team leader just to make sure that we're moving forward on this. But we want to make sure that we get those done. And if for any reason the team wants to try to talk with the commanding officer who issued that discipline, we obviously have that opportunity as well. We have to go through kind of our chain of command and then over to the police department, and then we can set up that meeting. But I know several teams have done that in the past. For the IA office hours, I know like with current COVID issues, that kind of like ratcheted down kind of in-person meetings again. So I think that's pretty much stopped, but we can kind of move forward on that as we need to. And that's the end on my spiel there. But Nancy, you have your hand up.
I just want to let everybody know that for the most part, IA's open both days on the weekends. And you can get time during the week if you have a reason to want to come in. It's not a bad place to have an in-person get together if you're talking about a case that the team is working on and has a problem with. At least team one has been able to do that on a frequent basis. So that's all. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Nancy. Going on to new business, as you guys probably all saw, and I kind of had warned everyone about in our last meeting, I drafted a proposed memo that was going to go to the city council. The purpose there is, as we all know, we're a little bit overworked. And I wanted to yet again reiterate the fact that as we've had more resignations on the commission, that it's unsustainable for volunteer members to continue to be putting the amount of work in. So what I've done on that, and I'll pull it up so we can kind of go through it. 1 second, let me share my screen. The goal here is I would like to, as long as it gets approved, I would like to send this out potentially tomorrow. And then what I've done is the items in yellow, I was going to update after the meeting. That first block where it says include action items resulting from the public safety Louisville neighborhood meeting, I'll probably just delete that because I think everyone kind of knows what happened is it got sent to the full city council. But basically, the goal here was just to kind of establish what's going on, where we are today. And then kind of that fourth paragraph down, we basically kind of restate that, you know, our interim commission should have 23 members, but currently we're at 15. But we have a scheduled resignation at the end of this quarter, which is Sheila. She's announced her intention to resign on March 31st. And then also, as many of you are aware, we have a commissioner that because of family commitments, he has not been able to put any time in for the commission for the last several months and most likely won't be able to for the next several months coming up. So effectively, we're going to have 13 commissioners doing the work. So we'll essentially be down 10 commissioners. The other thing we've brought up in the past when we've had meetings with city council members is over the last couple of years, complaints have almost tripled. So obviously the workload has skyrocketed to the point where internal affairs has actually hired on additional investigating sergeants. And then I just make a note that in that same time period, we've actually lost 7 commissioners. So there's more work coming our way, fewer people to do it. And then I kind of put out a list of bullets down here, just kind of explaining kind of what the issues are. That first bullet, Doug, with the transition committee, we've created a working timeline. Now, obviously it's a draft, but it's our best guess of when we think things are going to be happening. And it is an aggressive guess. So I did put that in the memo, but we're estimating based on that timeline that we will not have new commissioners until January of next year. And then as all of us know, it takes several months to get new commissioners trained and up and running. So that's part of why we have a little bit of the urgency. And I just kind of made a note of kind of the additional work we've been doing. Instead of having our twice a month meetings, we've been doing almost weekly meetings, you know, for the last year. And obviously if we have to cancel meetings because we don't have cases or we have quorum issues, we've canceled those. The third bullet point, I'm just pointing out that usually myself as the chair and Doug as our first vice chair typically don't do case reviews, but the two of us have been doing that for the last year, 2 years, just because we're trying to make sure that we can continue to go through cases. And then I did make the note that we reduced our quorum, so we were able to have our meetings. I know that's something we talked about, and we had that done about three or 4 months ago, I believe. And then the last, or second to last item there is we have had a couple commissioners that have expressed their interest to resign for, you know, family reasons, work reasons, whatever. And I put this in there due to their outstanding commitment. That's just their commitment to the community to make sure there's oversight. So they've basically agreed to stay on, even though they would like to resign, because they want to make sure that the commission can continue to function. So, you know, ideally, if we could get new commissioners on, we would allow those people who, you know, are ready to move on. We'd give them the ability to actually be able to do that. And then, you know, they would be able to kind of fulfill their other commitments for either work, family, or other. And then the last item, I think this is something we've all talked about. It's kind of creating a downward spiral. The more commissioners that resign, the more work there is for the remaining commissioners, which means there's too much work for those people, which makes there's a higher chance that you're gonna have additional people resigning because they're gonna get to the point where they just can't do the work. So at the end of the day, what I'm proposing here is that the city council basically use what's in the current draft ordinance that's going to the full city council, because it does address commissioner appointments and how that process would move forward. So essentially, we're going to be asking them to use that to do a standalone ordinance that would allow the city to appoint new commissioners to our commission. And with that, I wanted to open up to any questions, feedback, and comments. And first, I see Nancy's hand up.
Because I forgot to lower it before, but I do have a comment, a couple. It seems to me we are at the point where we can't keep up. I mean, we're already there as far as I can tell, Brandon. We don't have to wait another month.
Oh, I agree. I totally agree.
But when you say you're going to ask them to appoint, we're going to have a process for like nominations, right? And
yeah, and
isn't that where we have to go first? We have to go ahead and have a process where we accept nominations, recommendations, and go through the whole process before they get to appoint.
Yes, and I'll let Doug chime in on this as well, because obviously he's very detailed on this with the transition committee. But part of it is the way the current ordinance is drafted. The city council wants to still be able to make nominations, and what that, now that we at least have that draft, it does give a framework for how the community can try to nominate people, how we as a commission can nominate people. So that's kind of been established by the draft ordinance. So once we move forward, the problem is we couldn't do anything because we didn't know what the composition would be, how it was going to be divided up. Is it, was it, now it's, one per district, and initially there was some discussion that you'd have one per police division. That question has at least now been solved, or at least more or less, unless the city council changes that. But that helps us at least know the basics for what we need to work with. So yeah, you're right. But if they move that piece forward, that would answer all those questions as to who can nominate, how they're nominated, what the qualifications are for potential commissioners. Doug, do you want to add anything on that?
Only that it would first require an ordinance, and so it can't be something that they just decide to do. It's something they have to do by ordinance. As we know, ordinances are not created overnight. And essentially what we're asking them to do is what we had advised them to do initially, and that was to do the part of the implementation ordinance that deals with the appointing the commission separately, so that it can be underway before the rest of the implementation ordinance is done. And so I don't know whether they're going to reconsider doing that. And if they do it, I'm not sure that they're going to go through the process that we are envisioning for the permanent commission, because that also would be time consuming. And so we haven't really gone down that road yet. I guess the first issue is whether or not they're willing to consider doing it. And by doing it, I mean creating a separate ordinance that would deal just with the issue of the interim commissioners. And if they are interested in doing that, then we can have discussions on what that process would look like.
I think, and to Doug's point, we've already raised this issue previously in a memo to the city council. The political will wasn't there to do a standalone ordinance on that. But I believe it's our responsibility to let them know that, I mean, we did this before, but I think, as Nancy pointed out, we're almost to the point where we're not able to function as a commission right now. I mean, the level of work, I mean, to be honest, is not fair for the commissioners that we have today. None of us really agreed to, initially, I think we were all told, 20 hours a month, which is a lot. And I know several of us are doing, upwards of 60. I think Patrick did a case where he was doing 100 hours on a case. So I think the problem is, as volunteers, that level of work is not sustainable. Especially for those of us who have full-time jobs. We can't continue to be doing that work for the city without the city helping us by getting more commissioners on to be able to help distribute that workload fairly, because otherwise, like I said, we're going to have more people that just can't do it anymore, and then we're going to have more resignation. So that's kind of why I wanted to send out this memo, to kind of give them another heads up, and hopefully a little bit of nudge so we can actually get commissioners on here, because I know that's something the community wants too, is they want fresh blood on the commission to be able to review these cases that are coming to us. So I wanted to see if anyone had any concerns about how I drafted this, or if they want to propose any edits or revisions. obviously I'm open to feedback since obviously it's going to be coming from us. So I want to make sure everyone feels that I'm speaking fairly on behalf of the commission.
Maybe,
Yep. I have Robin has her hand up first. Let's go with her. And then I heard I think maybe it was Nancy. Go ahead, Robin.
Brandon, I'm going to admit I did not read this in great detail. I knew the content, so I didn't review like kind of some of the. Anyway, what I'm telling you is you may have answered this question in the memo and I missed it. Do we want to put any sort of request for response in terms of a timeline?
This into any potential action from city council on this?
Yeah, like get back to us by this date about what your thoughts are, or you know what I mean? I don't know. Just
yeah.
I feel like because I just sometimes feel like something open-ended will just keep getting pushed, right?
Sure.
Anyway.
Yeah, and what we
might be
we've tried,
aggressive.
yeah, what we've tried to do in the past, and I'm not opposed to putting that in here, but we've also usually tried to reach out to all the city council members. We've tried to do it, once a quarter, but to be honest, we've been so busy, we haven't had a chance to do that. But we've at least put the offer out to meet with all the city council members, every several months to kind of explain what's going on with the commission, ask them questions, answer any questions they may have about the work that we're doing and how we're doing it. So I think we could also follow up with them, in those one-on-one meetings, but I would be happy to try to put some kind of, we'd like to hear back your thoughts by, X date. I'm not opposed to that.
I mean, I don't know what anybody else thinks. I don't know as a tactic if that would work or not. It's just a thought. I put it out there.
I mean, I think what I might default to is I would probably leave it out on this one. And then if we're not seeing any action, then we could potentially reach out to them and see what their thoughts are, and then potentially try to push it that way. Did you have, go ahead, sorry.
I said, sure.
Okay. Charmaine, you have your hand up.
can we go to the first page, please? And I should have noticed this when I made some revisions to this document. Can we change that percentage and just make it 75%?
I was trying to be exact, but yes.
Thank you.
I actually went back and looked to see what the exact percentage of the vote results were, but yeah, that's fine.
Thank you.
Andre, go ahead.
Yeah, if I could unmute myself, it would help. So on the second page, Brandon, you say in one of the bullet points, some commissioners have expressed the desire to resign. Would it be helpful to say how many have expressed the desire to resign?
Yeah, I could, but I would want to check with those individual people first before I did that.
Okay.
Make sure they're comfortable with that.
Yeah, and the only reason I'm asking is because if you were to say, 4 additional, and I don't know how many it is, but I'm just saying if it was 3 additional people, just to kind of put a bit more numerics on this entire problem, and to reiterate the point that we are dropping in numbers down to a very unsustainable commission.
Okay. Yeah, let me reach out to those individuals first before I do that.
Sure.
I'm not opposed to that. Nancy.
I just remind people, we have a set of bylaws we modified so that we have to have at least 7 people to conduct business. So that's one number we might want to highlight.
Yeah, I have in the 4th bullet, I mentioned that the quorum is currently 7. Any other comments from anybody? Yeah, go ahead, Andrea.
No, just that, I'm in support of sending this. I just want to voice that. I'm in support of this.
Thank you. So what I'm going to do is obviously this number here, once we have our vote, I will tally that up and make it correct. I had actually suggested pulling this piece out because obviously initially I was thinking there might be more edits and revisions to the draft ordinance before PSLN. But I think at this point it's kind of clear. It's going to full city council for feedback. So I'm just going to delete that altogether. And with that, Yeah, go ahead, Doug.
I'm just gonna make an observation that the,
Yeah.
the city council, because this is being sent to the whole city council through the president. I think it's likely to get bounced back to PSNLN. So just a process wise, I think that they are likely to defer to PSNLN rather than take it directly to the full council. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, and I agree with that. I mean, I think that is the proper place for the oversight of who we are as a commission. But I think also, since the charter makes it very clear that each city council member can appoint, or if this current draft goes through as it currently is drafted, each city council member would have the ability to appoint.
It does
or
not say that.
They can nominate someone to fill
Okay.
a district seat.
Yeah, and I guess I just want to clarify that the current draft doesn't say that the council member appoints the person for their designated seat. So it doesn't mean that the council member from District 1, according to the current draft, gets to make the appointment or the selection for the person who represents District 1. So that's still to be determined.
Sure. Yep. Steve.
Yeah, I'm looking at the document on October 6, 2020. The mayor appointed 8 new commissioners. And I'm only seeing a handful of them are here today. Does that mean that we have an issue retaining new commissioners?
I think so. That was also a previous memo we sent. We also asked for trying to get, at the time, the board, trying to get as many people on as possible, given the fact that from how we were looking at the way the law was written, that we would most likely not be able to add any commissioners while we were in that interim period of trying to get that ordinance created. I do think at that point in time, it was a hard time for new board members to get trained, because we just started kind of going with the whole COVID related issue. So as we were starting to get people appointed, getting them trained, trying to do everything virtually, it was not an easy time for them to come on board. And I do think in that process, from the time that they expressed interest in joining the board to when they were actually able to get appointed, was a very long time. So I think that could have had a little bit to do with it. But I think also some of the people that in that group, some had work commitments, some had family commitments. And that's, I think, why most of them have slowly walked away. I think it was the majority of the people that have left from that, it's been employment related issues. I think we had one person that moved out of state. We had another person who their workload changed. Well, actually a couple of people where their workload changed. So that's kind of the point I was trying to raise, is for especially commissioners who work full-time, the current workload is really not fair to them, because we were trying to tell everyone that, the amount of time you're going to be putting in is about 20 hours a month. And I think probably most of us are probably putting in 20 plus. And I think I put in here anywhere from 20 to 60. I think, and Doug and I are probably the outliers, but I mean, I think I had one month where I was doing like 120 hours, which is almost full-time work, so it's, I think, something for a volunteer commission. We have to make sure that the work assigned is something that is doable. And to be honest, people who are filing complaints, they want to hear what the resolution is on their complaint in a reasonable amount of time. And so if we're not staffed at a level that allows us to do that, it's also not fair to the officer who has a complaint against them. It's not fair to the person who filed a complaint, because they want to know what's going on. Why is it taking a year more for my complaint to be resolved? But part of it is, we are working as fast as we can with the resources that we have. So that's kind of why I wanted to send out this memo, to kind of encourage the city council to move forward, because, as I said here, it's not sustainable. Andrea.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. Just wanted to chime in real quick on your comments about what it's been like to come onto the commission in a fully remote environment. Getting trained in a fully remote environment is not easy at all. And I still, although I've been on the commission, I don't even know how long, not long enough, but there is so much information to take in. There is so much to learn. I look at a case and we go over it in our meetings and I'm like, oh, that's clear cut. That's, why we don't even need to discuss that. And then somebody raises a really good question, or somebody makes a point, and it's like, oh yeah, that's a good point to make. So, it does take a lot of time to really understand, to really learn all the ins and outs of the case review. And that was not and still isn't easy to do in this sort of virtual environment, at least for me. And I don't know how the other commissioners who are new or who came on sort of in the past 12 months feel about this. The other comment I wanted to make real quick is that throughout this pandemic, people's lives have changed in very unpredictable ways. And so it's fully understandable that commissioners who initially came on board, their lives have been impacted in ways that they probably couldn't foresee. And so therefore they had to leave the commission. And frankly, this may continue to happen, even if we bring on new members now and we get them trained, and any of our lives could be impacted in any kind of way, just, due to the environment and due to the situation we're in. So I think it's just also a little bit of a reminder that these are very unprecedented times that we live in, and that we still try to do the best that we can with what we have for this commission during these times.
Yeah, thanks. That's a really good point. And I always try to, whenever I talk to the media or anyone about this, I always try to let people know I've been on the commission now board now commission for just shy of 7 years. Actually just slightly over 7 years. And when I first started, I want to say it probably took me a good 6 months just to feel comfortable doing it, and probably another 6 months to get good at it. So, and that was when I had the benefit of being able to go in and do in-person trainings, and we had a team lead that could meet with me every weekend. And so we also try to say, like, when we bring new people in, it takes a good 6 months before they can really start to review cases and understand what all the policies and procedures are and how the law applies to cases. So it's not as easy as just getting someone to sit in a seat and get it done, especially to the point where you get someone who can independently review a case and then share it and present it to the commission. So I don't want to totally belabor that. And Nancy, I saw you had your hand up and now it's down. Did you still have a question or comment?
I was just going to say, there are times when we should recognize that it's not all bad having retired persons on this commission.
I certainly agree with that, but part of what we're trying to do also is we want the commission to be representative of the demographics and the community of San Diego. And so we need to, have diversity across everything.
I'm just saying it's more stable. The other thing I want to say to Andrea is that this is something this attrition business is something that happens all the time. So you just have to expect there will be changes in people's lives, or they'll get on. Frequently, we have people who get on, they do it for a couple of months and they go, I don't like this, and they leave. You just don't know ahead of time until you've been involved in it. And you're certainly invested into it, which is wonderful, but not everybody can do that. So thank you.
So I don't want to go too crazy on this. Oh, Poppy, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to lower my hand because you're moving on, Brandon. Let me just say while I'm speaking that I appreciate you drafting this memo. I think I think it would be impossible for anyone to not know my feelings about this situation. And forgive me for being cranky sometimes. I want to say everything Andrea said, yes, and everything Nancy said, yes. I think that we're all really on the same team, and all of those truths are reflected in where we are today. But the only thing that will get us out of this is to have more people on the commission to be able to do the work. And so to that end, I appreciate you drafting the memo and sending it along.
Excellent, thank you. So with that, I drafted it. So if someone is willing to make the motion to approve, I would appreciate it. Otherwise I can do it, but.
So move.
I was just going to note, Brandon, there was it looks like a public comment in the chat, which you may want to read.
Yeah, so Yasmin from Mid-City Can, she basically says, this is why it's so critical that commissioners are financially compensated as well, hoping this is something that we can push forward. I don't believe it's in the current draft ordinance, but I know back on one of the previous versions, it was very clear that it stated that we were a volunteer, in other words, unpaid commission. I don't remember seeing that in the most recent one. But to be honest, we didn't have a lot of time between the versions we got and everything we had to do with city council meetings and all that. So I could have missed it, but I know that's something that was previously brought up, is doing a small stipend potentially for commissioners. Years ago, we voted on that, and I think the commission or board at the time decided to not make a recommendation to move forward on that. But thanks for that comment on there. So going back to the motion, I think I heard, was it Nancy made the motion?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and then can I get a second?
Second.
Is that Poppy?
Yeah.
Perfect. So we have a motion by Nancy and a second by Poppy. Charmaine, can you do a vote, please?
Sure. Commissioner Case,
Yes.
Commissioner Vaughn,
Yes.
Commissioner Fitch,
Yes.
Commissioner Holtrop,
Yes.
Commissioner Dent,
Yes.
Commissioner Spruce,
Yes.
Commissioner Shea,
Yes.
Commissioner Dabba Griffin,
Yes.
Commissioner Clark,
Yes.
and the chair abstains. Motion passes.
All right,
The
perfect.
vote is 9. You want the vote? 9-0.
901.
Yep.
I was writing it down at the same time.
Okay.
All right, now, and actually I can pull up the agenda. Let's share that. So we're going to go back to committee chair reports. So Nancy, you're up first on that with any continuing education committee stuff.
Tonight was just the absolute best. My head's still spinning with all that information. We've wanted that for a long time. I really don't have any plans, except I want to add to my list to have somebody from Kumeyaay Nation speak to us about their experiences with the police when they're off the reservation. That was a suggestion from last year, and I still want to do that. So if anybody has anything they want to learn about, please let me know. Thank you.
Can you provide me with more information regarding restraining orders?
Sure,
Thank you.
will.
All right, Patrick already did outreach and he had to step away about probably 20 minutes ago. Rules, Doug, do you want to touch base on anything under rules?
Sure.
So
I have nothing under rules or handbooks. You can proceed.
okay, perfect. So for policy committee, we do have our every 2 months or so, we meet with the chief of police and the executive team there. We have our meeting tomorrow at 2 o'clock. That was supposed to be a couple weeks ago and that got pushed back. One of the items I was given a heads up that they have some answers for us is I had requested information from the wellness unit, specifically the policy committee had a discussion about how does the department return officers to field duty after a traumatic incident like an officer involved shooting. So we finally got some of that information last month, and then I had a list of several questions that I returned back to the police department, and I understand that they will have answers to, I think, all of those, hopefully, tomorrow. So I will probably have some information on that. The other issue we had was using profane language as a de-escalation tactic. We were going to be looking into that one a little bit more in detail, just to kind of, for the public. And obviously, if the public has any questions, if you raise your hand, I can probably go to you for public comment on that. For the profane language thing, the policy, the way it's written is officers can use swear words in certain circumstances, and that is considered to be within policy, whereas in other certain contexts, it is not within policy. So we wanted to kind of delve into that a little bit. And then also the use of political or membership affiliation under uniform policy. So that came up with Blue Lives Matter logos on holsters and things like that, jewelry. That kind of came out of a complaint that we had seen. Kevin is not here for recruitment, so we'll skip over that one. The meeting for the Citizens Advisory Board yet the other day was canceled because they did not have quorum. So we're not the only one that sometimes has quorum issues, but I know they've been struggling with quorum for quite a while. And then Doug has a lot of updates with the transition committee, so I will give that over to him.
Yeah, I'm not sure we had it. I guess we had one meeting we had to cancel because of a quorum, but you know, despite our dwindling numbers, people have been showing up, and we have not had to cancel any open meetings due to a quorum. We've canceled some closed meetings because there wasn't enough cases, but by and large, the membership of the commission have continued to attend meetings, and we have not encountered the quorum issues that others like CAB have. Anyway, Brandon is correct. There's a lot to report under the transition planning committee. The budget update, we submitted 4 budget items to be changed for the next fiscal year, which begins on July the 1st. One is to include, I think it's $200,000 for as needed contract investigators. That would depend upon the workload of the staff investigators, and also whether or not that we need some particular expertise for an investigation. We did some reorganization of the staffing, and we want to have a full-time financial person. Our current model has a person who works half-time with, or approximately half-time with complaint coordination, and the other half with the finance issues, and we really need somebody to work full-time handling all of the bookkeeping and financial planning. We asked for money so that our contract for outside counsel would extend for another year, because we don't expect to be able to hire a general counsel until, in a best case scenario, the very latter part of the next fiscal year. And so we asked for a continuation of the $180,000 per year for outside counsel. And then we requested, I think it was $100,000, correct me if I'm wrong, Charmaine, for executive search expenditures, which would be for things like using executive search firms for recruitment, transportation expenses, for if we have out of town applicants we want to bring in, and so forth. And so those were the budget items. And if you can,
I'm scrolling down to the budget itself, actually.
Okay.
Actually, let me do this one.
Anyway, I don't want to go into detail there because I don't think we have time. But those were the 4 items that we requested modifications with, and we'll be making a presentation to. Who to make the presentation to, Charmaine? It's the
Executive Budget Committee.
And that'll be happening, I think, in February. Is that correct?
Yes, February, I think February 10th.
Okay. And then we go back to the agenda. The next item was staffing, and what we're working on right now is the contract for outside counsel. Because it is a city contract process, we really can't talk about it other than to say that the individuals in the search committee are myself and Brandon and Kristen Rizzo, who is an attorney who serves on the Human Relations Commission, with Charmaine as an advisor. And the process is nearing completion, and we hope to be able to tell you the results of that process in the very near future. Then the big item is number 3, which is the draft implementation ordinance. As everybody here is aware, last Thursday evening, we had a special meeting to consider recommendations to the PSNLN regarding the implementation ordinance. That meeting was over sometime between 5 and 6, and then like 3 hours later, as Charmaine and Brandon and I were working on the memo, we discovered that suddenly on the city's website for PSNLN, there was a new draft of the ordinance, the 3rd draft of the ordinance, or as they referred to it as the corrected 2nd draft, which made some substantial changes and addressed some of the issues that we talked about at our meeting. And I think Patrick eloquently expressed that was a result of a community input and I think the desire of especially D4, to try to resolve those issues prior to the PSNLN, so the PSNLN meeting was not as contentious as it was back in June. So going briefly over what the outcome of all of that was. A philosopher once made a comment that don't let the perfect become the enemy of the good. And I think that what we have right now is good. It is not perfect, and there still are some revisions that need to be made, but many of our concerns have been addressed. With regard to the structure of the commission, we were concerned that all of the seats were designated seats, designated by either the 2 youth seats or 23 based on geography. And we asked for at-large seats. I think we asked for 14 at-large seats, and what they ended up doing was creating 9 at-large seats. Initially, they were going to have 2 per council district as designated, and now they're only going to have 1 per council district as designated and 9 at-large seats. Then they put into the ordinance the selection criteria that we had recommended with some minor modifications. The definition of investigations, we specifically asked that they include the terminology of the comprehensive gathering of original sources, and that was added by amendment at the PSNLN meeting itself. We had asked that the language regarding the ability of the commission through an operating procedure to be able to make nominations through a nominations committee be included as a must instead of a may. There was concern expressed that that would infringe upon the authority of the city council to make appointments. I'm not sure that it would, but I was asked a question, and my point was that even if must is not included, it's clearly the intent of this commission to move forward with that if we have the authorization to do so. Another major issue of community concern was provisions that kept people with past criminal convictions from even being considered. And that was substantially changed in the new ordinance. For example, individuals who have committed felonies can be considered. And I think there's 3 circumstances. One is if they've completed their probation parole and then have completed 5 years beyond that. Second is if they received a certificate of rehabilitation from the state that was talked about at our special meeting last week. And third is if their felony has been dismissed or expunged, etc. The next item regarding records was not put into the ordinance, and that's something that I think we will continue to push to make sure that we have that there's an adequate definition of records, and that the commission has access to all of the records and data that we need in order to fulfill our duties. The phrase in the section that we were concerned about are considered personnel records. When it's talking about commission records, was not included, but the attorneys didn't feel that was important. Our request that the ordinance state that the commission investigators shall have full access to incident scenes on first walkthroughs was not included. We can include that in the investigation procedures, which will be the next step of the process after the implementation ordinance, but we had hoped that it would be included in the ordinance itself, and it at this point is not. There was discussion regarding the references to collective bargaining in the ordinance, and after questions were answered by their outside counsel, they decided not to change that. And then we had recommended that all complaints, findings, and decisions and recommendations by the commission be made public to the fullest extent of the law as soon as practical. That was included without that final phrase. That did not include that phrase to be made public to the full extent of the law as soon as possible. But they did include that the commission shall on their website provide all that information. And then as our memo mentioned that we still want to address the issue of the selection of the executive director. We concur that it should go into the ordinance that created the office of the Commission on Police Practices. And we did have at least one city council member who shared that concern. So we will continue to address that, not through the implementation ordinance, but through the other ordinance I just referenced. And so that's a real brief report. It was interesting because when they gave us the new draft, it was not a red line draft. And so we had a, what is it? How many pages is it?
It's like 30 something, isn't it?
Yeah, 34 pages. And so we had to go through all 34 pages and see what was changed. But we get it all done, and I think that the Public Safety and Livable Neighborhoods meeting went well, and the process is moving forward. I think as people are aware, they referred it on to the full City Council, who then will be referring it on to the meet and confer process.
So when you're done, Doug, Yasmin she has her hands up, I think, for public comment. She also had a couple questions. She did ask a question in the QA, which I've already answered. She was asking, where can we find the newest draft that was posted after the PSNLN committee meeting ended? I sent the link of the one that was dated January 20th. I don't believe they've actually sent out a revised one with any updates after the meeting on Friday. So that was the link I sent. And then she also has another question.
If I could respond to that question, Charmaine sent out an email to the commission prior to this meeting that has a copy of the January 20th draft, as well as the changes that were made at the commission. And so if you could contact Charmaine can forward that to you because that's public information.
And then her other question, and she just said, will do, thanks. Her other question was, would this $200,000 be in addition to the already allocated funds for the CPP Independent Legal Counsel? I think you're saying the 180, we're asking for an additional 180 for the next year, but go ahead.
Yes, yeah, so $180,000, which is what we requested for this year for the legal counsel. And that would be in addition to whatever money we have for the general counsel. So basically we want to extend our outside counsel because we envision that we'll need outside counsel for the full year. And then the $200,000 is for investigators, and that is basically a contingency fund, not a contingency fund, but a contingency line item that would be used on an as-needed basis.
And that thing also, just to elaborate on that a little bit, that could also be used for expert witnesses, for example, if we needed to, hire our own use of force expert, if needed, that would be how we'd pay for that. And then actually I see your hands down, so I guess your questions are good, but if you have a public comment or anything, raise your hand again and I'll let you be able to speak. Doug, did you have anything else on that?
Not on that, unless there are any questions. And so the last item is the office space update, and there's nothing really new, but for those of you who are not aware, the space we're looking at is actually the space where Charmaine's office currently is the former office of the Office of Boards and Commissions, as well as the Cultural Arts Commission. And so basically it's the ninth, is that correct? The ninth floor of the Civic Center Plaza building. And so we're looking at most of that office space with renovations. And so we'll give you an update as that proceeds. And that's it. And we will continue meeting weekly, same time, same. I think we're meeting now at 10:30 on Fridays.
Yeah, thanks, Doug, for all your work on that. I know the transition committee is an amazing amount of work, and you've been doing a great job on that. So on behalf of everyone else, thanks very much for everything you've been putting into that one. It's not an easy task. All right, moving on to the chair's report. As I was saying a little bit earlier, we are working with the city's kind of hours management tool called Better Impact. There's a bug right now where all of the options for how we can kind of allocate our time for commissioners have all disappeared. The only one that shows up are options for interns. So Alina is going to be working on trying to get that fixed with the city's IT team, I believe it is. And then once that's updated, they'll let us know and we can put our hours in. But definitely try to make sure that you put your hours in. As you probably noticed in the agenda we had, Charmaine put together about a 3-page report that kind of details what the commission is working on, what are any concerns we have. And one of the areas we also put in there is the amount of hours that we put in. She had to go by the hours that we had already in the system. So not everyone had put their hours in yet. So the hours in that report that was in with our agenda and all of our documents, it's definitely underreported. So if you have, once we can, if you can put your time in, we can try to make sure we get those hours reflective in our annual report once we get that one done. And then the other reminder we'll be putting out is if anyone wants to move from committees from one to another, or if you want to add another one, let me know. We've had, as I said, we had a couple resignations. So obviously we're going to be pulling them off, and then we're going to probably need to have some extra people on there. So I'll be sending out an email kind of checking to see where everyone wants to be. The idea is everyone needs to be on at least one. If you choose to, you could be on more than one. Does anyone have questions on that? Nancy, I see your hands up.
Yes. The Continuing Education Committee needs members, and I'd be willing to have everybody who's on the commission sign up to be a member. I also had a question about the hours. What kind of categories? And we used to do it on paper, and there were categories that we put our hours into. What are the categories that you all use, Brandon?
So, and I can probably share it with you, but as you go into the tool.
I don't go into the tool. I'm not going into the tool. I just need you to tell me what they are.
Yeah, so the categories are everything from doing case review. There's meetings like our open or closed session meetings.
It's the same categories that we
Yeah.
had in the hard copy spread. The hard copy.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it was also just a way that within the tool, it gives us an easy way to be able to say like how much time was spent by commission members on training versus going in for team reviews versus meeting with city officials, whether you're meeting with the mayor's office or the police department or things like that. It just allows us to be able to kind of track how many hours go to what categories. The next item up was resignations. I think as most people know, we did have 2 resignations earlier this year. Joe Craver resigned, and Ernestine Neely also resigned. And then as we mentioned a little bit earlier when we were talking about the memo, Sheila has also announced her intention to resign at the end of March. So with that, obviously we do have several vacancies for the commission. That's why we're trying to see if the city can move forward on trying to help us with that. But also I think it kind of also illustrates we definitely need people on our various committees so we can make sure we're getting the work done on behalf of the city. Update on the collaboration with statewide oversight groups. As I think I mentioned in the past, San Francisco is kind of leading a quarterly meeting of a bunch of different agencies kind of throughout the state. The first couple meetings have kind of been just kind of getting things starting to roll. There's another one, I believe it's the 10th of February. If anyone wants to join that, I was going to actually send that to the cabinet. Usually it's about an hour and a half, right around kind of noon, like 11 to 12:30 or so. So, I'll send it to the cabinet. So Charmaine, myself, Doug, and Poppy, if you guys want to attend, obviously we can. And if you guys anyone else wants to attend it, it's open for anybody. But they're pretty informative. Usually what we've tried to discuss is what are the trends that we're seeing, not just here in San Diego. Obviously, we're one of the biggest cities in the state. But, what I realized is when we wrote a memo about officers not properly turning on their BWCs, literally 3 weeks later, LA had the exact same issue. So we realized rather than reinvent the wheel, let's see what we can learn from each other and hopefully make everyone better by being able to learn off of other people's experiences. So the next meeting is next month. I can share that with anyone who wants to attend. We did have a conversation about trying to do a joint meeting with CAB on the CBE data. So there were some slight data changes. I think it was how the department kind of categorized a couple things just to kind of reflect, I think it was demographics mostly. But we wanted to try to see if we could have a meeting. We did ask the chief of police if he would be interested in attending that. And I think at this point in time, he's not really thinking it's helpful because they've already done several meetings with outreach. But we're going to try to, I'll continue to work with CAB and see if that's something that we can do. The idea is rather than just kind of rehash what the data shows, we're trying to look for solutions. So what can possibly make things better? So that's kind of the objective out of that one. So we'll probably talk about it in our meeting with the chief tomorrow, and probably next month we'll have an update for that. And with that, I'm done. Does anyone have any questions for me? Okay, Charmaine, it's over to you.
Excellent. For item A, caseload update and status of case reports. So as of today, we had 86 active cases assigned to our teams. I expect that number to go up by one. Hope we receive another one late this afternoon. This fiscal year summary, the commission reviewed and deliberated on and closed out 62 Category 1 cases, 4 officer-involved shooting cases, 1 in custody death case. The commission also audited 10 Category 2 cases and evaluated 13 disciplines and 1 shooting review board report. The statistics for each team are as follows. Team 1 has 16 cases in their queue, 13 are Category 1 cases, 1 of which have sustained findings and 3 Category 2 cases. The team has no in custody death or officer-involved shooting cases. Team 1, does that sound about correct?
I think we have 2 that have sustained findings, Charmaine.
Okay, I'll make that correction. Thank you.
Thank you.
Team 2 has 6 cases in their queue. Of the 6 cases, 5 are Category 1 cases, 1 is a Category 2 case, and 3 of the cases have sustained findings. The team has no officer-involved shooting or in custody death cases. Does that sound about correct? Team 2?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Team 3 has 8 cases in their queue. Of the 8 assigned cases, 7 are Category 1 cases, and 1 is a Category 1 case. Actually, 1 is a Category 2 case. Of the 6 cases, 6 of the cases have sustained findings. The team has no officer-involved shooting or in custody death cases. I know the team leader is not here tonight, so Commissioner Dent, does that sound about correct?
Yes, this sounds about correct. Yes.
Thank you. Team 4 has 25 cases in their queue, and I know Doug has been working hard with the transition committee, so he's kind of like pulled away from doing the case review. So of the 25 cases, 16 are Category 1 cases, 7 are Category 2 cases, and 4 cases have sustained findings. 4 has 1 shooting review board report to evaluate still, and 2 officer-involved shooting cases, 1 of which has a sustained finding and no in custody death cases to review.
Yeah, I have not had a chance to look over the most recent spreadsheet, but that sounds about accurate. But the officer-involved shooting case with the sustained finding is on the agenda for next week.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Team 5 has 9 cases in their queue. Of the 9 cases, 5 are Category 1 cases, 2 are Category 2 cases, and 2 are officer-involved shooting cases. The team has no in custody death cases to review. Team 5 has 1 shooting review board report and 1 discipline to evaluate. Team 5 has 1 case that does not have a sustained finding that is approaching the 1-year deadline. Commissioner Clark, does that sound about correct?
Which one is that one, Charmaine?
I can email it to you. But
Okay,
there's one that's approaching. I think it's a March deadline.
March 10th. Okay, yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. Team 6 has 22 cases in their queue. Of the 21 cases, 17 cases are Category 1s. 6 cases have sustained findings. 5 of the 21 cases are Category 2 cases. The team has no in custody death or officer-involved shooting cases before them. And 6 has 2 disciplines to evaluate. Commissioner Shea, does that sound about correct?
I think I'm kind of acting as pseudo lead. So yeah, that sounds about right. And I believe we have, Steve has 1 case that's ready for review, which I started looking at it yesterday morning. And then I think Kevin has 1 that he's almost done with. So we should have probably 2 or 3 cases ready for review for the commission.
Okay, so it looks like we'll have at least 6 or 7 cases ready for next week if we do meet next week. Excellent, thank you. Are there any questions regarding the case assignments? I don't see any hands. So item B is the NACO in-person conference recap last month. The chair, first vice chair, Doug Case, and myself at the NACO conference in Tucson, Arizona. There were COVID protocols in place to protect the attendees, and thanks to the coordinators, everything went smoothly. I believe everything went smoothly. Just because of the pandemic, I was kind of nervous about attending, but they required that everybody upload their vaccination cards, and everybody had to wear the mask in the rooms. So it was good. Some of the sessions that we attended were understanding the impact of creating and sustaining effective civilian oversight of law enforcement, partnering law enforcement with mental health social workers, case studies, and more. So my takeaway from this year's conference was the importance of community involvement and effective oversight. So that was basically the theme of this year's conference. So I don't know if Chair Hilbert or First Vice Chair Case has any highlights or takeaways from the conference that they would like to speak on.
Go ahead, Doug. You can go first.
Well, in consecutive time, I think Charmaine did a good job of summarizing it. So unless you want to add something, Brendan.
I think it was my first one. I know you guys have been there in the past. I found it to be really informative. And I part of the thing I thought was most helpful for me was actually having conversations with other oversight agencies around the country to kind of hear. The good thing is we find out that we're actually doing a lot of things that other areas aren't doing. So I think that's actually really positive. I think there's always room for improvement, but in a lot of conversations I had, we would share how we do our process and how one of the biggest things is in San Diego, IA doesn't close a case until after we've reviewed it. And that's pretty much unheard of in most other areas. Usually by the time the oversight group reviews a case, the police department's closed it and you can't make changes. So I think that's one benefit where San Diego really does things differently. And I think that really helps the community. And it also makes the commission more effective. So but yeah, no, it was a great conference. I think everyone there, had a good experience. It was a smaller group from what I understand, but no, it was really good. And I think Charmaine summed it up perfectly.
Excellent. And we also had a chance to meet with the IA Pro vendor. So that was awesome as well.
We got a demo actually, which was interesting. Yeah.
Yes, he had his table all set up. So that was really good. So this year's conference is going to be somewhere in Texas. I don't recall what city, but I know it's going to be in Texas. So I'm looking forward to that. This item is the update on the release of the statistics to the open data portal for fiscal year 2021. So I'm still working with the performance and analytics department to make sure that the correct data is released fiscal year 2021. They sent me the statistics a few weeks ago, and I had a chance to look through it, and there was some errors. So hopefully we can post this data to the city's open data portal soon. The next item is the release of the CPP standardized annual report. So the Office of Boards and Commissions requires that all boards and commissions fill out and file with the city clerk's office the standardized annual report. It was included in your meeting with the meeting agenda for tonight. Earlier this month, I completed the report and forwarded it to the city clerk's office. So please let me know if you have any questions regarding the report that was submitted earlier this month, like I mentioned, and it should be posted, I believe, to the city clerk's website. Does anyone have any questions regarding the standardized annual report?
Mom.
Who's that? Please mute your microphones.
Maybe they had a question.
Oh no, I heard something.
No, that was my grandson running through upstairs. I just turned it to mute.
So I don't know if you had a chance to read the annual report, but normally when I put together the annual report, which I haven't done in past 2 years since COVID hit, I normally put a lot of information. I try to be as transparent as possible and trying to put as much information into the report for the community's purposes. This standardized annual report is supposed to be only 2 pages, but I think it's like we were able to get as much information in it as possible. So I think it's between 6 and 7 pages. So I tried to make sure that I put as much information, especially highlighting the recommendations that the commission did last year, as well as the number of meetings and some other things. So it's really, I think it came out pretty good. And lastly is, I just wanted to mention that these last 2 weeks was a blur. It like flew by. We held interviews for outside counsel, held ad hoc transition committee meetings, as well as special meetings and budget related meetings as well. So we continue to be extremely active, especially during this transition. So I want to thank each of you for putting up with us and our emails. And I know Alina and Robin has been doing their part as well. So special thanks to the commission's leadership. That's the chair, first vice chair, and second vice chair. Fitch, those late night tasks, reviewing memos and making those corrections. And also special thanks is owed to our outreach chair, Patrick Anderson, who summed it up pretty well, for coordinating, participating, and compiling feedback for the roundtable discussion. So I know it's a lot, especially for volunteers. So I appreciate all that you are doing and helping bring this transition forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Charmaine. And then Chief McGrath is not able to attend today, but I know Captain Dupree was going to try to jump in. Again, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we do have our bi-monthly meeting with the chief and the executive team tomorrow at 2. So we're probably gonna be going over some of these issues, but Captain, did you want to specifically go over anything, or?
No, he'll cover most of it tomorrow, and I think its goal is to have most of your questions answered that he had sent to him previously.
Perfect. And a couple of these items on here are kind of legacy items. We're waiting to get official formal reply to our recommendation so we can actually post it up on our website. And I think that's something we'll probably be talking about tomorrow. We did see a draft, and I had replied back with a couple comments on that. So once we get some the formal response, we'll be putting those up on our website. But those addressed, it doesn't address the protest policy, but I think it addresses items 2 to 6, the B2C and secure facilities, warnings prior to using OC spray, et cetera. So we'll probably have an update for that at our next open session meeting. And with that, I guess we're good on the PD report. Commissioner ride-alongs, I don't believe anyone's done any given the spike of COVID of late, but if anyone has done a ride-along and you want to chime in real quick, feel free to share your thoughts or comments on that. All right, I'm not seeing any hands raised, so I'm going to guess no one's done them. I do know with COVID, I think, the spike we had, I'm guessing most people didn't do any ride-alongs for the last couple months, plus the holidays. So actually tomorrow, I will just kind of confirm to see if ride-alongs are available again. I know the spike's starting to go down. So if people are feeling comfortable want to do a ride-along, obviously I think they're important for us to be able to do, but obviously we want to make sure that it's a safe place for us to do it with COVID and wearing masks and all that kind of stuff. Are there any commissioner announcements or comments? All right, well, not seeing any, almost exactly on time, 7:58. I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Joe would be proud.
Yeah, exactly. 2 minutes early, actually. So.